Natalia, for that wonderful reminder of how much we have to do post-repeal, as well as what a broad issue Repeal the 8th is. It's a big equality issue, and it's a big issue around pregnancy care generally, and not just about abortion. So next up, we've got Emma Burns, who's going to be speaking to us, representing the Centre for Disability Law and Policy. You're welcome, Emma.
Thanks, Ruth. So yeah, I'm very grateful for this opportunity to represent the Centre for Disability Law and Policy and to speak about repeal of the 8th Amendment in terms of its critical importance to people with disabilities in Ireland. I'd like to address 4 main issues. So the impact of the existing constitutional position on people with disabilities in Ireland who wish to terminate pregnancy, the 12-week proposed limit in relation to disability, the need for better information and support to be provided to those who receive a diagnosis of a fetal abnormality in Ireland, and, if I get to it, how new legislative framework which simultaneously respects reproductive choice and does not discriminate against people with disabilities can be developed in Ireland once the 8th Amendment is repealed. Okay, so starting with the current position of people with disabilities in Ireland who want to terminate a pregnancy. As with others, people with disabilities are obliged to travel in order to access abortion. Our understanding of the difficulties of travel for people in these circumstances has been deepened by the testimony of groups like People with Disabilities Together for Choice and Disabled People for Choice in recent months. Their voices are essential to the development of human rights compliant legislation. We've heard from them how travel is complicated by accessibility requirements, including physical access to transport and services, as well as the support required to travel, such as personal assistance. Many people with disabilities may face additional barriers in accessing information about services available in other states, particularly where this information is not provided in accessible or alternative formats, such as Braille, sign language, and easy-to-read versions. People with disabilities living in congregated settings can face significant barriers to accessing information about abortion, especially where the disability service provider responsible for their care operates under a particular religious ethos. Many service providers do not allow internet access in their residential services, and often people's activities and their mail are under surveillance. The right to privacy of people with disabilities may be compromised by a request for support in arranging or travelling for an abortion. The lack of awareness of the position of people with disabilities in the current debate has led to attempts by some commentators to misrepresent their position and to spread misinformation which stigmatises disability. So an example of this is the much-touted myth that the 8th Amendment has saved children with disabilities, or that the proposed 12-week restrictions will lead to disability-selective abortion. This is untrue. The Joint Oireachtas Committee rejected disability as grounds for abortion, a position we welcome. The reality for most pregnant people is that basic prenatal screening is offered in most maternity hospitals at 13 weeks, and later or not at all in some rural hospitals. Nuchal translucency tests and amniocentesis are currently provided at 14 to 15 weeks, where clinically indicated. Fetal anomaly scans take place after 19 weeks. A non-invasive test can be performed at 10 weeks if it is requested, but it is currently only available privately. Results may take weeks to process and are confirmed with later amniocentesis. It's therefore highly unlikely that women will seek to terminate pregnancies for reasons of disability within the first 12 weeks, and there is no evidence to support claims that allowing abortion without restriction as to reason up to 12 weeks will encourage terminations in cases of disability. So some of these considerations bring me to our third area of concern: the need for disability-sensitive, human rights compliant information on fetal abnormalities. As I said earlier, there is no consistency in access to prenatal screening in Ireland, a position which is partly due to the existence of the 8th Amendment. There are fears that as screening becomes more commonplace, selective abortion will become normalised, creating challenges for informed consent and reproductive autonomy. In our view, antenatal screening must be scaffolded by scrutiny of informed consent processes and provision of comprehensive, non-directive information that's compliant with a disability rights approach. So the current Medical Council of Ireland guidelines state that it is not lawful to encourage or advocate an abortion in individual cases. This should not change. Doctors may give diagnoses and information, but any counselling offered must be non-directive. The existing Medical Council guidelines and stricter regulation of counselling services should ensure that prenatal diagnoses arriving from screening are accompanied by non-directive counselling and comprehensive signposting and resourcing of pathways of care. Robust pathways include referral to a clinical expert in fetal medicine, care from multidisciplinary teams with experience of supporting crisis pregnancies, through and beyond the neonatal period, and where requested, referral to abortion services. Good practice around disclosure of a pre- or neonatal diagnosis of disability recognises the uniqueness of each pregnancy and emphasises the strengths and abilities of children born with a particular condition. Initiatives like the HSE's Informing Families project need to be built on and improved and rolled out across health services as a resource to assist health professionals in providing information to women about continuing a pregnancy and raising a child with a disability in a way that is disability sensitive and respectful to human rights. It will also include referral to abortion services where requested. So, respecting disability rights and reproductive freedom in accessing abortion. During the current referendum campaign, hang on, where am I? I think I'm repeating myself a little bit here. Yes, okay. So, as I said, some commentators have expressed concern that abortion law reform might lead to an increase in disability selective abortions and contribute to devaluing the lives of disabled people in Ireland. We believe that the proposed legislative framework for abortion respects a woman's right to choose while simultaneously valuing the lives of people with disabilities. So this framework could be further strengthened by providing support for people with disabilities to live full lives in their communities. It is important to emphasise that disabled women, including women with intellectual disability, mental health experience and other cognitive disabilities, may also need access to abortion, and they should not experience discrimination in this respect. In our view, significant reform is needed to ensure that the information provided to women about continuing a pregnancy and raising a child with a disability is accurate and respectful of human rights. We recognise that women may choose to terminate a pregnancy for a wide variety of reasons, and that one possible reason is the lack of state and other community support to raise a child with a disability. The solution to this grave problem is not to make abortion impossible to access, but to ensure that the state fulfills its obligations to provide adequate supports, including healthcare, social support, education, so that people with disabilities and their families can live full lives with dignity in their own communities. We do not support legislation that suggests that a disability is an undesirable condition or contributes to stigma and discrimination of people with disabilities. The language used in some laws in countries such as Greece, Estonia and Poland, which have similar exceptions on disability grounds, is offensive and discriminatory to people with disabilities. In light of the UN Convention on the Rights of People with Disabilities, we argue that the most human rights compliant approach to this issue is not to restrict women's access to abortion. Instead, we should ensure that Ireland provides equal access to abortion as a means of reproductive autonomy for all women, including women with disabilities. We advocate that women should have access to abortion where she believes that to continue with a pregnancy would constitute a risk to her health. The health ground should be broadly interpreted to ensure respect for reproductive autonomy and should prioritise women's own views as to what would constitute a risk to their own physical or mental health. The right to privacy, also protected by the Irish Constitution, should ensure that women do not have to provide more detailed reasons for their decision. At this point, it's important to distinguish a fatal fetal abnormality from a diagnosis of potential disability. We believe that if fatal fetal anomaly is defined as a condition which is incompatible with life outside the womb, or where a fetus has no prospect of life after birth, that these approaches do not discriminate against persons with disabilities and do not, in our view, constitute disability selective abortion. We would caution against Ireland employing disability-specific exemptions to existing abortion regimes on the basis that such exemptions violate the Convention on the Rights of People with Disabilities. In particular, Article 23, which is respect for the home and family, and Article 25 on the right to health. Other articles of the CRPD, such as the right to have respect for privacy, Article 22, reinforce the notion that women with disabilities are entitled to reproductive choice. We have lots of detail on the CRPD. I'm not going to go into it all now because I will lose you. So we will keep going. So just a few further considerations for law reform after repeal. There are many existing areas of law in Ireland which require amendment to ensure that people with disabilities will have equal respect for their reproductive choices once the 8th Amendment is repealed. Now, any new legislative framework would have to include accessibility requirements for information and provision of reproductive services for people with disabilities in Ireland. And going off track, chatting with Natalia earlier, a lot of those intersections that affect people living in direct provision or people from migrant backgrounds are the same issues that are affecting people with disabilities, around accessibility, around transport, around conscientious objection and the limitations in terms of being able to access doctors, all of these things. It's not for one particular group. We need to always be aware of who in the room is not able to access abortion that we think they should be able to access. And keeping voices central to the legislative process afterwards is absolutely essential and must happen, and not just one particular group. I kind of think I've drilled my point home to most of you in conclusion. The CDLP supports the repeal of the 8th Amendment, obviously, to the Constitution, and which we view as a violation of the human rights of persons with disabilities and others in Ireland who need access to abortion services. We strongly believe that abortion should not be regulated in the Constitution, which is not an appropriate legal mechanism to deal with the complexities of legislating for this complex and multifaceted issue. Instead, we believe that human rights compliant legislation can be developed following repeal of the 8th Amendment, which respects reproductive choice and freedom while continuing to value the lives of persons with disabilities on an equal basis with others. And I'll leave it there. Thank you very much.